Now, no text of the EU-US trade agreement has yet been released, with several key discrepancies emerging in the statements given by President Trump and by President von der Leyen as well. The U.S. leader said a 50% tariff on steel and aluminium would be unchanged, while the EU chief said metal duties would be cut and a quota system would be implemented. Trump also said that pharma was not part of the pact, while von der Leyen said that the 15% levy would apply to this sector. But with Trump's upcoming tariffs on drugs, quote, on a different sheet of paper. Similarly, the EU side said that the deal covers chips, while the US has said it will announce details on semiconductor-specific tariffs in 2 weeks' time. So there's still a lot of uncertainty, really, when you look at the detail of what has been announced yesterday. In the meantime, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has said that the deal offered some clarity. Listen in.
We have stabilized on a single 15% tariff rate for the vast majority of EU exports. This rate applies across most sectors, including cars, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals. This 15% is a clear ceiling, so no stacking, all inclusive. So it gives much needed clarity for our citizens and businesses, and this is absolutely crucial.
Now, President Trump hailed the opening of the European economy to American imports.
We are agreeing that the tariff straight across for automobiles and everything else will be a straight across tariff of 15%. So we have a tariff of 15%. We have the opening up of all of the European countries, which I think I could say were essentially closed. I mean, you weren't exactly taking our autos, you weren't exactly taking our agriculture. And then you would have smaller things, but for the most part, it was closed.
So let's get a check on how European futures are moving at this hour. We have roughly an hour and a half to go before bourses open across the European continent, so we'll get a stronger indication of the reaction in Europe then. But in the meantime, you are looking at positive futures and positive moves as well. So let's see what's going to happen. But the main narrative as well for the time being is that the announcement of an agreement that will basically establish a 15% tariff rate on European goods brings a degree of certainty, particularly as we were approaching the August 1st deadline, and President Trump had threatened to impose tariffs of 30% after that date. But as we highlighted earlier in the show, there's still a lot of detail that we have yet to understand, particularly as well when it comes to pharmaceuticals. In the meantime, I also want to show you briefly how we're faring when it comes to the currency space. Thinking about some of those moves, we had seen the currency, the European currency, the euro, actually moving a little bit higher. But in the meantime, that is actually unchanged. So let's see if we're getting stronger moves later in the session. Let me also take you to Wall Street and show you how futures are moving at this hour. The futures actually pointing to a positive start to the trading day, so very much continuing this narrative that we are witnessing so far in Europe this morning. Worth keeping in mind as well that beyond what we're discussing today of the trade deal between the EU and the US, it is still very busy when it comes to earnings and when it comes to data as well. So there's plenty of activity for investors, not just today really, but throughout this week. However, though, I want to bring your attention back to our top story and looking at some of the latest comments from European leaders. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has welcomed the deal between the EU and the US, saying that the agreement safeguarded core interests, adding that stable, predictable trade relationships will benefit everyone. In Italy, the Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni also welcomed the breakthrough, but stressed she could only judge it fully once she was able to see the details. The reaction from industry leaders and economic watchers has not all been as effusive as that of the German and Italian leaders to some extent. A board member at the German trade body BDI has described it as an inadequate compromise, saying that the EU is accepting painful tariffs and Germany industry will suffer a huge negative impact. In fact, the IFO president, Clemens Fuß, described the deal as a humiliation and called on the European Union to wake up. He said Europe's military and tech dependence on the US needs to be reduced before returning to the negotiating table.